Sandpaper is another one of those consumables that you can buy very cheaply. So the grit matters. Ideally, when you go to paint, your goal is you're trying to get the grit, your last grit should be about 220. Prime it, and then sand it with some 320. The whole goal with this, I mean, we've all felt sandpaper, I'm not gonna pass it around, but you can feel the grit is basically, you're coming through after, so if I start with 80 grit, then I wanna jump to 120 grit, then I wanna jump to, I don't have it, 180, and then finally 220. And the whole goal is you're creating scratches on your surface. So we'll take the 80 and make a mess. Thank you, Sean, for this photo. So if I take, so if you feel that, it's really rough. If I go to paint that, it's not going to fill those roughness. So I've got a smooth hull. If I were to just paint over that, you're going to see all those scratches through the paint. It's all going to carry through. So the goal then is, if I start with 80, usually the rule is about 50% of your grit. So if it's 80, 50% of 80 is 40. Okay, so you would want to jump no higher than 120, and then 50% of 120 is 60. So they don't make a 200 grit sandpaper, or my math sucks right now. So then you go from 120 to 180, and then 180 up to 220 is basically you're sanding to remove the previous scuff marks and get a smoother and flatter surface. But again, even just hearing that versus that, like there's a difference just in terms of auditory. When you're sanding too, if you can use some sort of sanding block, we all will, even if I just use my palm, my hand's gonna put different pressure in the area. So when you talk about getting like a nice smooth, like you can't even see the repair, part of that is also just getting a smooth surface, because I can actually take this hull, and if I sand it with just like my fingertips, you're gonna be able to see where my fingers were pushing down. Whereas with some sort of just foam block, or another nice thing that works really well, another Harbor Freight find is they sell just these sanding boards. So this you can put your sand on it, and then you can sand with that, and you'll get a much smoother surface. If you ever get into using a power sander, always use a lighter grit than you think. So by hand, like I might start with 80 grit. With a power sander, I'd probably start with 120, just because of the simple fact that this has more weight and mass to it, and it has a higher likelihood of me creating a bigger headache. Again, in vein of like if you're doing the repair and you mask out the area, try to make your repair and your footprint as small as possible. This obviously, this is the size of the sandpaper. I can't make that smaller. And letting your sander do the work. So instead of sort of gouging or trying to muscle through it or remove material too fast, don't put pressure down on it. You can get sanders that are different shapes. So depending on like if you're sanding a deck or something and you want just a flat pad or something that'll fit in, and then you can get ones that have bigger pads. If you ever get to a point, like my guess is the biggest point you guys would ever meet a sander is if you guys decide to repaint your oars. If you're doing volume of this, again, if you can do it outside, if you can have a respirator on, protect yourself. The next level is you can always hook these up to vacuums too, which takes all that dust instead of flowing in the air. Again, I did probably 80 WRC oars with this sander and a vacuum over there in a one-car garage in the middle of the winter. And I had hearing protection on, I had a respirator on, I was covered in dust afterwards, but it's still better than nothing. Like that bag when you do 10 oars is going to be utterly useless, let alone any quantity of them. Even just a shop vac will be better than nothing. They sell little adapters, but again, now we're starting to get into you're spending a lot of money. Probably not exactly this. That sand.